Back now for part three of my long series of interviews with Senator Tom Cotton about his brand new book, Only the Strong, putting national security on the table in the week before the election in a way that I have not seen anyone do since Richard Nixon in 1980 put out the real war to buttress Ronald Reagan's campaign against Jimmy Carter. In that way, Senator Cotton has put out Only the Strong to buttress every Republican out there because we need to focus on national security, even as inflation is crushing us, education is collapsing around us, the border is open, we'll come to the border. Senator, it's painful to talk about, but we have to talk about the collapse in Afghanistan a year ago because no one in the mainstream media, legacy media, has abandoned the issue. We've condemned a country to darkness. We didn't have to do so. Mike Pompeo has told me, you've confirmed, we were planning to leave 2,500 troops there. It didn't have to happen. Was that incompetence? Was that design? Was that Joe Biden just living off the fumes of the Obama presidency?
Well, I think the way Afghanistan collapsed last summer was the combination of Joe Biden's rank incompetence and his deep insecurity. As I explained in Only the Strong, drawing upon some memoirs at the time by people like Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, Joe Biden in 2009 subjected Barack Obama to what Bob Gates called Chinese water torture over Afghanistan. And he poisoned the well between Obama and our military leaders, constantly accusing them of being misleading, of leaking to the press, of undermining President Obama in a way that Bob Gates said he never saw under George W. Bush. May have disagreed, may have seen disagreements between senior military leaders and President Bush, but no mistrust. That's pretty common for Democrats and the military, though. But for 13 years, Joe Biden believed that he was right about Afghanistan, and everyone, including Barack Obama, was wrong. And he had a chip on his shoulder. And he wanted to show everyone in 2021 that he had been right all along. And that's why he disregarded the best military advice of our commander in Afghanistan, our commander in the Middle East, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his own Secretary of Defense, frankly, most of his own civilian advisors in the White House and the State Department. He wanted to show that he was right and had been all along. And he wouldn't listen to the obvious facts about what led to the collapse in Afghanistan so precipitously. I mean, just 5 weeks before Kabul fell, he was saying there'd be no Saigon-like collapse. And this is now what, as I explained in Only Strong, the Afghan effect is going to be as bad as the Vietnam effect was for at least as long as Joe Biden is president.
Let's stay there for a moment. The Afghan effect has a knock-on effect, which we've seen in Ukraine. Are we going to see it in Taiwan? How do we arrest the dictators of the world from concluding that President Biden is simply incompetent and infirm and unable to stop their every move?
Well, I explained in Only Strong, it was just a few weeks after we left Afghanistan that Vladimir Putin began to marshal forces on Ukraine's border. I think that President Biden's weakness in Afghanistan, combined with his appeasement all last year of Vladimir Putin on various matters like a nuclear arms control treaty and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline hack, enticed Putin, if you will, tempted him, gave what Churchill called temptations to a trial of strength. Now, the war in Ukraine hasn't turned out the way he expected, but it should have never been tempted in the first place. I hope that won't be the case with Taiwan. But frankly, now that Xi Jinping has achieved an unprecedented third term, he's stacked the Politburo with his own allies. I worry very much that he may, like Vladimir Putin did with Ukraine, see a closing window of opportunity while Joe Biden is president to go for the jugular in Taiwan. The best thing we can do, and what a new Republican Congress will do, I hope, is increase our defense budget, invest particularly in the kinds of weapons, especially missiles and munitions, submarines, drones that we need to support Taiwan, and that we get Taiwan the weapons it needs right now, that we don't wait until a war begins the way Joe Biden did in Ukraine.
Senator, you serve on armed services, you serve on intel, you're on judiciary. Do we have enough time? The sleepwalking into this crisis is so far advanced. We saw how long it took to get a HIMARS to Ukraine. I mean, this was not even the commitment of American troops, much less a direct confrontation with a superpower, though, of course, Putin has nuclear weapons. It took forever to get that, and now we're out of ammunition. Do we have enough time, even if the landslide comes and you lead an American strength movement in the Senate and you have counterparts in the House? Do we have enough time?
Well, in Taiwan, as I explained in Only the Strong, the hour is late, but it's not yet expired. Most of what Taiwan needs It's not stealth fighters. It's not aircraft carriers. It's relatively straightforward missiles and munitions or sea mines for the Taiwan Strait. These are things that take way too long to build right now. But again, they're not on the scale of an aircraft or a ship. And if we invest the money now to increase the rates of production for the missiles and other weapons that we sell to Taiwan, I think we can get into their hands what they need to defend themselves. We also have to be more straightforward and clear that we will come to Taiwan's defense. Unfortunately, as I explained in Only the Strong, Joe Biden 3 times in 9 months said we would come to Taiwan's defense, only to have his White House aides anonymously walk it back and say he didn't mean to change our policy. That gets the worst of all worlds, Hugh. You get provocation without deterrence. Now, one of the challenges of writing a book that's partly about current events is that it can be overtaken by events. In Only the Strong, I said he did it 3 times in 9 months. He has since done it again. So now it's 4 times in 13 months. What he needs to do is...
Your book has not been overtaken by event. I want everyone to understand, though, Only the Strong is about as timely a warning on national security as I have ever read from an elected official. When we come back, we're going to get into the deep ideological problem here, because the most important part about Only the Strong is not our crisis. We can talk about our crisis every day. It's where did it come from? And we'll talk about that in the next segment later in the show today. Stay tuned for more of Senator Cotton. Back now with United States Senator Tom Cotton, his brand new bestseller, Only the Strong, in bookstores everywhere, Amazon.com. And I've set aside a longer segment right here because the ideological roots of the book is about, well, there's a lot of Hegel in history. There's a lot of Lincoln and the founders. There's a lot of Woodrow Wilson. And finally, someone has explained it. Now, Jonah Goldberg has tried a few times. Fine writer, friend of the show. No, he's a friend of yours. He's tried a few times in big books that only people like me read to explain where this came from. You went back and tried to do it again. Would you explain to people why you think it's important that they get what Wilson was and why it matters today, and why the framers, Lincoln and Reagan, are different from that?
Hugh, I think it's important to understand the ideological roots of the decline Americans see all around them. As I said, Barack Obama is the most ideological president since Wilson. Now, Barack Obama was very careful, though, to mask his ideology. Sometimes he let the mask slip, like, for instance, when he was attending Jeremiah Wright's church for all those years. Jeremiah Wright, remember, the infamous pastor who said 9/11 was America's chickens coming home to roost, that God wouldn't bless America, but rather damn America. This is not some passing relationship. I mean, Barack Obama saw down his church, sat in his pews for years, even had him officiate his wedding to Michelle Obama. Or when Barack Obama said that America wasn't an exceptional nation. When he said we were going to fundamentally transform America, Hugh. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who think that if you love something, you should want to fundamentally transform it. I can't imagine the fetching Mrs. Hewitt would take too well if you said, honey, I love you, but I want to fundamentally transform you. With Obama, though, it's somewhat rare that ideological mask slips. With Wilson, you see it out in the open. The first president who was openly hostile and opposed to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. He said they were outdated, they were obsolete, they belonged to a Newtonian age of checks and balances, not a Darwinian age of evolution. He said that the moral basis of our nation, the natural equality of mankind, that none of us, as Jefferson said, are born with saddles on our backs to be ridden or spurs on our heels to ride, was outdated as well. He had this conception of history with a capital H, that it was evolving and therefore mankind could be respectable, that we could have heaven on earth, that we could achieve utopia. The founders knew that this was all nonsense. They understood, as Madison said in the Federalist Papers, that government is the greatest of all reflections on human nature. And our nature is that we're fallen creatures. We are the creatures that are between the animals and between God. We're capable of self-government, we're capable of reason, but there are also parts of our nature that require more circumspection. That's why we have law enforcement and prosecutors and prisons. That's why we have a military. That's why you have a lock on your front door. They understood that you couldn't build America's foreign policy on utopian foundations. And moreover, what you see as time evolves, after Woodrow Wilson and the progressives had repudiated the moral basis of our founding and our nation, it wasn't a very far step to the 60s and 70s when the New Left repudiated America itself.
Did this Hegelian mirage, is it conscious in your opinion on the left today, or is it inherited? Is it just simply a reflex muscle memory, or do sometimes President Obama, people like that come along and you believe they're ideologues, but let's just take your average senator you're sitting next to in the United States Senate. Do they have any idea who Hegel is, or do they think that's a bagel factory?
No, I don't think so, Hugh. I mean, I think there are a few self-conscious ideologues like Barack Obama who do. I mean, they're like Wilson, very much understood the project he was undertaking. It was as much a project at home as it was abroad. You know, Woodrow Wilson had this idea that we had overcome the need for separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, all these protections built on the nature of man as described in the Federalist Papers. That you have to have a degree of circumspection and care before granting power to anyone, and that you cannot grant them unchecked power. Wilson thought that was so much nonsense. That's why he wanted to run roughshod over the Constitution, create this alphabet soup of agencies we have today. It was his idea that you're going to have some, elite, disinterested, scientific core of experts to tinker and administer and engineer society, as opposed to accountable elected officials. Now, most people today just take all those things for granted. And frankly, a lot of people on the right do as well. Whenever you hear a politician say something like the arc of history or being on the right side of history, they are echoing Woodrow Wilson and the progressives and this idea that our nation is not founded on the natural equality of mankind, on a fixed human nature that is timeless and unchanging, but some kind of historical evolutionary process in which mankind is perfectible, in which we can achieve utopia. The founders would say history doesn't have an arc. There's no such thing as the right side of history. There's the right side of decisions that individuals make in the moment. And
this is why one of the claims you put in the ground, you put a stake in the ground, is that Republicans, conservatives, and Americans generally need to understand the founding. They need to understand Lincoln. They've got to understand what Reagan was talking about. They've got to get the ideas down. Let me take a shot at some of our friends, some of your colleagues in the Senate. I don't think if you say the Federalist Papers to them, they're going to think it's a wallpaper. They're not going to know this stuff either. Why are you reaching so hard in Only the Strong to get people to get the ideas down?
Well, again, I think because of the kind of country America is. Margaret Thatcher said America was founded on ideas and philosophy, not on history, which is how Europe had came into being in its modern form. It's so critical that we understand the ideas that motivated the left for the last 100 years. Why people like Barack Obama have done what they do. It's not something that's often said, and again, it's kind of largely assumed that, of course, we would have all these unaccountable bureaucratic agencies in Washington, a deep state of left-wingers who are pursuing their partisan agenda, far from being disinterested scientific experts as Woodrow Wilson imagined. As I explained in Only the Strong, we have to get back to the founders' understanding of our nature and the basis of our Constitution if we want to restore American power.
And last question for this segment. The left is getting further to the left. I mean, they're becoming more entrenched. If you look at the candidates on the ballot next week, Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, Raphael Warnock, your colleague in the Senate in Georgia, these are hard left. I mean, they are. Elizabeth Warren was out there already. They are not liberal. They are not liberal leftists. They are hard left. Is their party capable of stopping that tumble off of the Wilsonian edge?
Well, if they're not capable of that, the defeat they're going to receive next week is just a small foretaste of what's to come in 2024 and beyond. And you see some of the shrewder minds in the Democratic Party recognizing this, trying to get out in front of it to avoid blame, like Barack Obama in the same interview where he claimed to regret that he wished he had supported the Green Movement in 2009 in Iran, when in reality he failed to support it on purpose because he didn't want to deny Ayatollahs. He also said that, we can sometimes be buzzkills and scolds, that we get upset if people don't use exactly the right language. Now, again, Barack Obama is a deep and committed ideologue, but he's also a shrewd politician. What you see with a lot of the people you named is that they're deep ideologues. They're simply not shrewd politicians. They don't have the good sense to mask those sentiments during the election season.
And when we come back in the next segment, we're going to talk about emotional leftism, the deep sense of shame motivating a lot of the left. And do not miss that. Go get Only the Strong during this break and come back. We'll continue talking with Senator Cotton throughout the show, throughout the week. National security matters. Vote Republican. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, candidate Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway on this Tuesday, the first day of November. Rabbit, rabbit, rabbit. I always love the first day of a month. I especially love the first day of the month when it comes up and Blake Masters is leading in Arizona. Blake Masters joins me, the next senator from Arizona. Good morning, Blake. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. Always great to be with
Yesterday, I made the choice to open the show today with you, Blake, because the New York Times Siena poll, unbelievably, has you down 6 points to Mark Kelly. It's so far off that I'm going to use it forever as an example of broken and ideologically driven polling. What's your response to obvious disinformation and fake news a week before the election?
You know, it's funny. I hadn't even seen that poll, hadn't even heard about that. But you said it, no better term than fake news. That's what it is. It's a suppression poll. I don't even think they're trying to get it right. I think they're designing this to try to, demoralize our Republican voters here in Arizona. It's not going to work, though. They'll tell you what, this is a dead heat. We are statistically tied in Arizona, and we've got the momentum.
Not only the momentum, the crowds. I've talked to a lot of people who've been campaigning with Blake Masters in Arizona, and the crowds are there. Carrie Lake is running away with it. She could win by double digits. I think you're going to get some effect from that. But you've also got people like Juan Ciscomani and others. You've got some great congressional candidates who are turning out the vote as well, Blake Masters. It's just coming together.
And we're working together. I think we've got a fantastic ticket in Arizona, but it's not like everyone is just running their own siloed race. No, I'm doing events with Kerry almost every single day. Abe Hamadeh, our Attorney General, like you mentioned, we have great congressional candidates. Ciscomani down here in the Tucson district. Look, we got to work hard. We're the underdogs. We're going to sprint through the finish line, but we could be looking at a statewide sweep. That's how things are shaping up here.
And Blake, I believe that's going to happen. I also happen to think yours is a very interesting race against the forest of races that I cover, because you emerged as a newbie. I think we did our debate almost a year ago when I got my first look at you. I'd read your book, the one that you wrote, 0 to 1, and I knew you were a smart guy and that you'd done well, but I didn't know how you'd do on the campaign trail. You've taken to this stuff as like weight training. You love campaigning.
I really do. I'm looking forward to winning, and, we'll open up the next chapter. But part of me will be sad when it's no longer campaign time. I love getting out there and meeting voters. I love hearing their stories. Hugh, I think you could tell which candidates are out there having fun, right? And
yes, absolutely.
If you're not having fun.
Mark Kelly is the most dismal looking. Michael Bennett is invisible. Cortez Masto is invisible. Mark Kelly gets out there, and I've had Captain Kelly on, touting gun control before on the program. He's a nice enough guy, but he's just a Joe Biden cipher. And so I think that's caught, and I want to run through the issue set everywhere and get the Arizona swing on it. Number one, inflation, inflation, inflation. Is it the number one issue in Arizona?
It is. Maybe it's co-equal with the border crisis because they're both so important, but I'm telling you what, we're suffering from both. We have the worst inflation in the whole country at 13% in Maricopa County. So I hear it every day. People are tired. They want to make a change, and they're connecting the dots. Right now, they're understanding that Biden and Mark Kelly have caused this inflation with all their irresponsible spending.
Now, Blake Masters, when I talk about inflation in the Northeast, that home heating oil comes into it. That's not going to be a problem in Arizona. But 13%, that's not just groceries, right? That was the number for groceries year over year. In Arizona, it's 13% overall.
That's right. And I suspect if you measure it properly, it's more like 15 to 20%. It is just crazy.
All right, let's go to the second issue set, which is crime. I haven't been in Phoenix in a while. Usually a safe downtown, usually a place I wander around feeling good. What's the crime situation in Phoenix, in Prescott, in Tucson, wherever I'm on the air, up in Flagstaff? What's the crime situation?
Not good and getting worse. Homicide in Phoenix is up 50% since 2019. And in Tucson, get this, it's up 87% since 2019. That means almost double the number of people are getting murdered. We have fewer police officers right now walking the street in Tucson and in Phoenix than 4 or 5 years ago, even though the populations of each city have just increased. So if you talk to a TPD or a Phoenix police officer, they will tell you they feel slowly defunded. They don't have any air cover from their left-wing city councils. They don't have any air cover from Senator Mark Kelly, which is why the police have endorsed me in Arizona. We've just got to regain the will to slap the handcuffs on people who do bad things and put them away.
And to leave them there. I mean, you've got a great prosecutor in Maricopa County, and I hope she wins re-election because they're running a Soros prosecutor against her, which would be a nightmare. Let me move to education, Blake Masters. How old are your children? I forget.
They're 8, 6, and 2.
All right, the heart of the demo. All right, so I've got 70% of my audience have children living with them in the home, which makes this a unique show. It's a morning drive show. People are going to work. I think 90% of parents are pissed off. They are just so angry with public education. Now, Governor Ducey and the Arizona legislature passed a huge reform, the most important piece of state legislation since welfare reform swept the country in the 90s. What do you hear from parents? Because now they have a solution. They get $6,000. They can send their kid wherever they want. Has that diminished in any significant degree the degree of disgust that voters feel for elected officials in the school arena?
No, I don't think it's diminished or it's at all counterproductive. I mean, the school choice law that we passed in Arizona is a model. The best in the country. Every state should just copy it, literally copy paste, scratch out Arizona, write in their own state's name and pass it. But once parents have gotten this taste of freedom, taste of being in control, turns out they get more involved, not less involved. So great, everybody can choose the school that their kid's going to go to. That's a no-brainer. But now let's make sure that school has a healthy curriculum. Make sure that they're not teaching critical race theory, that they're teaching real history, not the 1619 hate your country fake history, right? And so I think it is a snowballing. And we're
the ideological tilt in the schools. Everyone knows now it's got to be eradicated. I want to close with the border, Blake Masters. I'm talking all week long with Tom Cotton about national security issues in his brand new book, Only the Strong. Part of that book is about the border because it's a national security issue. I mean, we arrested 98 known people on the terrorist watch list this year already. And so I'm just curious. Arizona is different from every other state. It's really taking the brunt of this. How many voters have changed their mind? And in particular, are the Latino voters coming to you over the border?
Yes, I think so. In fact, last week we met a Democrat who came to one of our campaign events, and she said, I voted Democrat my whole life. I'm still a registered Democrat, but I'm just sick and tired of this illegal immigration. And so she's going to vote Republican straight up and down the ticket, right? She didn't even mention inflation. She was just a single issue, tired of seeing hundreds of thousands of people walk across our southern border every single month. And I think it was the national security component that did it for her. If we've caught about 100 on the known terrorist watch list, that means there's probably thousands that have gotten in undetected. If you're
those are the least talented terrorists.
Like
those are the terrorists without talent. Imagine Iranian-backed state-sponsored terrorists trying to get across that border. So, Blake, we got 1 minute left. Because you are the last gasp for Democrats, they will pour everything into Mark Kelly. Have you got enough money? How do people help you?
Never enough, so I'm grateful if anyone can contribute. You can go to blakemasters.com. $5 or $10. I know it's tough in the Biden economy, by the way, but it's not for me. It's for the country. I think Arizona could vote for 51. So if you can kick in $5 or $10, that helps us stay on TV through November 8th. And our closing message to the American people and to the people of Arizona is simple. If you like what's going on, if you like the illegal immigration, the crime, the fentanyl, right, the double-digit increase in inflation, paying too much for gas and groceries, hey, you can reelect Mark Kelly. He caused all these problems. He'll make them even worse. But if you think you and your family deserve better, let's vote for a change. Get me in there. I'll actually fight hard for America, for Arizona.
Blake Masters, thanks for joining us. Run through the tape. Always a pleasure. Maybe we'll talk to you on election morning and make sure people get out and vote. Thank you, Blake Masters.
Thank you, Hugh.
Israel is voting, by the way. I'm talking not only with Blake today, I'll be talking with Joe Day, Tiffany Smiley. Israel is voting. They won't be done by the time I'm done today. Yesterday, the United States Supreme Court heard arguments in the Harvard affirmative action case. Here's the Chief Justice of the United States, cut number 12.
Being African American or being Hispanic or in some instances being Asian American can provide one of many, many tips that will put you in.
People say that, yes, but you will have to concede that if it provides one of many, then in some cases it will be determined.
I do concede that.
Okay, so we're talking about race as a determining factor in admission to Harvard.
Race for some highly qualified applicants can be the determinant factor, just as being an oboe player in a year in which the Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra needs an oboe player will be the tip.
We did not fight a civil war about oboe players. We did fight a civil war to eliminate racial discrimination, and that's why it's a matter of
Thank you,
of
Chief Justice Roberts. Thank you. We did not fight a civil war for oboe players. We did not pass the 14th Amendment for oboe players. Tiffany Smiley is going to be Washington State's next senator, fresh from her victory in the debate on Sunday night. Tiffany Smiley, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me on, Hugh. I appreciate it.
Fabulous performance. I played clips yesterday, and I just thought you were the obvious challenger, and she obviously is a smug incumbent.
Yes. She clearly has a plan, no vision for our future here in Washington State. She's not the mom in tennis shoes anymore, and I think that was clear last night. Look, I'm focused on the future, delivering results. I talked about those two little girls that I saw living out of their car and their mom trying to make ends meet. She needs the price of groceries to be cheaper, gas prices to be lower. Senator Murray waged war on our American energy independence, and enough. I mean, she has no plan, no vision for Washington State to deliver results, and I think that contrast was very, very clear last night.
It was, and you walked away with it. It's just that Washington State votes funny. If this was a normal election, you would win walking away. I just don't know how many people have already voted, Tiffany. How many people have voted in Washington State?
They're not actually, it's lower than 2018, I believe, as far as turnout returns. A lot of people their ballots see and learn, so that's absolutely in our favor. I have been traveling all over Washington State, hundreds of people coming out for events. It's remarkable.
Senator Cotton told me you have extraordinary crowds and extraordinary energy,
yes.
and he's been out there with you. That's terrific.
Is that exactly what we need to win and push going today's road? I'm in Washington State, 5 different stops today, sharing our message of turning into hope for all of Washington State. At my events, there's Democrats, it's all across the board. People are saying, we need change, and you're the person we want, Tiffany.
All right. The one thing I want to make sure we get in is your website. You're breaking up a little bit, soon to be Senator Smiley. So tell your website so people can help you out.
Yes, this is this Washington State. This is about the United States of America. This election is so anyone can help us at smileyforwashington.com. Out smileyforwashington.com.
Smileyforwashington.com. Keep pushing it. Pedal to the metal. Tiffany Smiley, I appreciate your doing so. Back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. I really appreciate your taking a lot of time in the last couple of weeks to talk to me. And last time I talked to you, you hadn't gone to the border. I want to catch up on that and then the closing week of the race. What did you see at the border?
Well, I got to tell you, Hugh, it's a humanitarian crisis like I couldn't believe down there. I spent some time with the Brooks County sheriffs, and they're spending 85% of their days picking up bodies out of the fields. They grabbed over 100 migrants that had died walking across, trying to get through down there in the last year. It's an enormous crisis. We've got to solve it. Michael Bennett, Joe Biden, they're ignoring the problem. They haven't done anything to help this border, and people are dying down there. And I got to tell you, the drugs they're picking up, that stuff's headed straight up I-25. Colorado might as well be a border state because it's coming to Colorado, and it's killing, our young adults. We lost over 1,900 last year to drug overdose. This border's got to get settled. I couldn't believe what I saw down there, and I can't believe they're just ignoring it.
Joe Day, I'm so glad you began your answer the way I'm a Catholic guy, and Archbishop Chaput, who ran Denver for a long time, he always talks about the border in terms of the poor people who are dying and being exploited on their way across. Yes, it is a national security issue. Yes, it's a fentanyl issue. But if we don't close that border, more people are going to die because the cartels don't care.
They don't care, Hugh. They're running it. They're taking these migrants. They put them in a car. They bring them across 10 or 15 miles, and they turn them loose in the desert because they don't care. and that's where these people are dying. It's unbelievable.
So,
I
Joe,
got to tell you, we're spending the week here. We're on a big tour of the state. We're in Pueblo tonight. We'll be in Alamosa, Durango. We're headed up to Cortez, and then on into Delta and Montrose here tomorrow and the next day.
Joe, I feel very good about your race. I know it's not picked up on in terms of like the New York Times didn't survey likely voters. I think they were afraid what they'd find. What do you feel? Because a lot of candidates don't show up in the last week unless they're winning or getting real close to winning.
Well, I got to tell you, we built a huge tent here in Colorado. It's good Trump supporters, GOP. It's independents. It's disenchanted Democrats that are giving up. We had a debate last week. It's the only one the soft senator would agree to. And I got to tell you, Hugh, I laid the wood to the guy. He's ineffective. He's the reason this economy is in shambles. He was the final vote on $1.9 trillion. But we got a great campaign running. I'm telling you right now, he's outspending me 4-1. I need help from your listeners. I got to tell you, joeodea.com, joeodea.com. This guy is ineffective. We got to kick him out of office. And I'm going to make sure we do all the hard work here the last week, get around the entire state to make sure he gets retired.
This is the most purely referendum on Joe Biden's Senate race. This one is just pure. Michael Bennett, the invisible senator, and really he can walk around downtown Denver and nobody knows who he is because he's just not known. He is believed by Democrats to be just the classic Democrat versus Republican race. This is just a classic referendum on Biden. And I watched that debate. My gosh, he was terrible, Joe. Didn't you expect more?
Well, he came unhinged. Could you believe it? He's calling me names because he's got nothing to stand on. The guy he's been there 13 years. He's done nothing. And he couldn't even defend it. Did you see the question where I asked him about, what
Yes.
he regretted defending? And he just gaggled on it. He didn't know what to do.
Now, it was a takedown. It was magnificent. But I must say, Michael Bennett underperformed my very low expectations. That's what it was just, I don't know how you stay in the lane and when the guy's punch drunk. joeodea.com, joeodea.com. Joe, it is a pleasure. Keep coming back. Let's talk to you on election morning and make sure, and I'm sure you're running through the tape.
We're going to do it, Hugh. I love your listeners. Get on joeodea.com and give me a hand.
Thank you, Joe. Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada. Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway, joined by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Good morning, Governor. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh.
It's Victory Tuesday. The Browns won a Monday night game. That doesn't happen very often, Governor. I was wondering, did you watch the Browns last night?
I did watch the Browns last night. They were dominant.
They were dominant. It's not like the 3-5 record would show. It's almost as though they were as good as the Jets. Governor, I always ask you two things when we start an interview before we get to the election in front of us. First thing, Lindor and Carrasco for Jimenez and Rosario. I still like the deal from the Guardians' perspective. What do you think?
And I'd like the deal from the Mets' perspective. Sometimes you can do deals that benefit both teams, and I think this one did.
It's a rare area of sports agreement with the former governor. Secondly, what is the latest you can wait to declare a presidential campaign in 2024? When do you have to decide publicly by?
I don't think until, I don't think he'll wait until mid-year of 23 rather.
Wait, I think you got to go in January, don't you think?
Oh, I don't think so, Hugh. Look, I think everybody is different. Everyone's going to have to make the determination different based upon, your own public profile and how the race shapes up. So it depends on when other people announce and your own public profile on that. Because, look, what I learned in 15 and 16 was a lot of that early motion is not progress. And so, a lot of it will depend on when will debates start and all the rest of that. So, I don't think there's any rush, Hugh.
Bingo. When do the debates start? Now, I've been urging Chairwoman McDaniel, who's done a great job, to get forums at least started among even unofficially people like you and Mike Pompeo and get Nikki Haley and talk about national security. And that, Fox will carry it. Someone will carry that. That's actually good TV as opposed to what we see every night.
No, look, I absolutely agree. And I think we have to be having this discussion as Republicans, laying out for folks what's been going wrong in this country, the problems with the way the Biden administration has approached all these different issues, from foreign policy to the economy to energy policy. And I think when those discussions start, that's when Republicans really have to be engaged.
Okay, the sooner that we get Republican potential candidates out on the stump, the better from my perspective. Okay, Governor, let's go to blue bubble problems. I got to play for you. Now, I have enormous respect for Margaret Brennan and Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd and George Stephanopoulos. They try and do a good job, but they're all in the blue bubble. And Chris Sununu just had it with Chuck Todd this weekend, cut number 10.
Each of the Democratic campaign committee heads that have done these ads supporting election denialists, I have put on this show, I have put them under this questioning. So I go back to you. Why are you supporting an election denialist? And do you think the inflation issue is enough to sort of rationalize support for somebody who thinks school buses of voters are going to show up in New Hampshire?
Yeah, let me tell you, you're in a bubble, man. I love you, Chuck, but you are in a bubble if you think anybody is talking about what happened in 2020 or talking about Mar-a-Lago and all that. I know the press loves to talk
Stop right
about
there.
it.
Governor Christie, it's a knockdown by Chris Sununu. You don't want to get in front of Chris Sununu when you're detached from political reality. But I actually think this is a widespread problem. You've been on the road. I've been on the road. Nobody talks about 2020. They talk about inflation, crime, and the border.
That's exactly right. And the other issue you hear them talking about is parental involvement in their kids' education. And you don't hear that. You don't hear about 2020. And I have been on the road, Hugh, all over this country, and you very rarely hear about the abortion issue as well, which is the other thing that the media is obsessed with.
Now, when that comes up, what Chris Sununu said is, I love you, Chuck, but nobody's talking about. On the Washington Post broadcast on Friday, I said to Ruth Marcus and Jonathan Capehart, look, guys, you may want to talk about threat to democracy. Nobody believes that outside of the left wing of the Democratic Party. Do you run into Republicans who are worried about the, quote, threat to democracy, Chris Christie?
No, I don't. And what I say to people all the time who bring that up is that I absolutely believe that January 6th, while it was an awful event, I think it proved the strength of our democracy. Because by 4 a.m. the next morning, members of the House and Senate were back on the floors of their bodies certifying the election, despite the violence, despite the things that happened. So to me, what January 6th ultimately proved was not that it was a threat to democracy, but it proved the resilience of our democracy.
When I see you on This Week, though, it's the same clip every week. They say crazy stuff about what the election's about, and you say, no, that's not what the election is. The election's about 13% year over year in food inflation. And, you know, Governor, I just don't think maybe the media makes too much money to actually feel impacted by this. Is that the problem?
No, I think they're in the tank for the Democrats, Hugh, and they don't. So when you're in the tank, you know, you've got to be able to talk. You don't want to talk about inflation. You don't want to talk about crime. You want to talk about, you know, abortion. You want to talk about threat to democracy and election deniers. And, you know, I think part of the job and one of the reasons why I do what I do on ABC is for the folks who watch there is to bring them back to reality of what's really going on in the country. You know, I was in Oregon last week, Hugh, with Christine Drazan, who's the gubernatorial candidate, and Lori Chavez-Remmer, a great House candidate in Oregon 5. When I was campaigning with those women in Oregon, what you were hearing about was crime, homelessness, and inflation. And that's all you were hearing about from voters. And that's the Oregon voters, Hugh, which are not, as you know, the most conservative in America.
So I like to tell people there are two kinds of Republicans who appear in legacy media outlets, refugees and missionaries. Chris Christie and I are missionaries. We try and go out and bring people back. But the refugees are out there chiming in on threat to democracy. Let me turn to the New York Times Siena poll. Yesterday, the New York Times said that John Fetterman is 6 points ahead of Dr. Oz and that Mark Kelly is 6 points ahead of Blake Masters. Both of those are ludicrous, Chris Christie. Why do they publish that?
Again, because they are advocates for a point of view, not reporters of news. And that's exactly what they're doing, and they're trying to stem the tide. Now, none of us know exactly what's going to happen a week from tonight. And if we did, we would all be making a lot of money on betting sites here and over in London. But the fact is that they do that stuff, and we've seen it, Hugh. It's to advocate for a particular position instead of a set of candidates. And what they're doing is to try to discourage Republican turnout. And Republicans just can't worry about those things. And independents who are concerned about this country, and quite frankly, Democrats who are concerned about the direction of this country, have to just listen to the debates, listen to the discussion, and make sure they're out there voting.
Now, Governor, you are, along with Mike Pompeo, co-chair of the Republican Redistricting Trust. I think the job you did is superb. I think we have a fair amount. I mean, there's some gerrymandering in Illinois and Massachusetts, and there's some gerrymandering in states that Republicans control, like Florida. But you work the margins pretty well here. And that's what this is. This is about small ball when it comes to redistricting. It's not about home runs. It's about small ball.
Those questions. Look, what you're going to see on election night from the work that Mike and I did, where it's going to show up most starkly, is in New York, where people thought we were going to get gerrymandered down to 4 seats. I bet you we will gain 4 seats on election night in New York, which never would have happened if we hadn't challenged that awful map that Sean Patrick Maloney, Chuck Schumer, and the whole gang tried to give us in New York. And I'm going to make this prediction. Sean Patrick Maloney is going to lose. The head of the DCCC is going to lose his seat to a great young candidate named Mike Longer, who I was campaigning with just a week ago in the Hudson Valley in New York. I think you're going to also see a guy named Mark Molinaro in the Hudson Valley in New York add a seat as well. And Lee Zeldin may very well win the governorship in New York.
Yeah, these are all true statements. And I was briefed by a Republican that Sean Patrick, what's his last name, Maloney?
Yeah.
He's spending the DCCC money on himself, which is not why people give money to the DCCC.
No, in fact, what he did was, it's even worse, Hugh. He took money away from races that he had pledged it to spend it on himself. Another $600,000 just this past week. That's when you know the head of the DCCC is going down the tubes. Let me tell you, when Rahm Emanuel was the head of the DCCC, he wasn't spending money on his seat in Chicago. And that's the kind of desperation that Maloney is in. And Democrats all over the map are in this kind of trouble. How about this? We are going to win for the first time in 40 years, I will predict to you, a House seat in Rhode Island. Yep. Alan Fung in the 2nd District of Rhode Island is going to win that House seat in Rhode Island. Those are the things that are going on across the country.
Governor Chris Christie, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on a great effort. And I'll be watching you on ABC to see if you can grit your teeth and get through again the alternative reality that is reality that doesn't often invade the networks at this time of year.